Ladies and gentlemen, there is a quiet moment in every life when something inside whispers, this is not enough. Not anger, not drama, just an inner stillness, fed up with settling. And in that moment, something divine happens. You realize life will only ever meet you at the level of your standards. Not your prayers, not your tears, not your hopes, but your standards. You see, your current life is not an accident. It is not karma or fate or luck. It is a mirror, a living reflection of what you've decided to tolerate. So ask yourself, are you proud of what you've accepted? If the answer is even slightly no, then stay with me, because this is where your real life begins. Your life is not shaped by what you wish for, what you pose about, or even what you constantly dream of. It is shaped by the level of your standards. The invisible line you draw between what you accept and what you refuse. You can have the most powerful intentions, the boldest affirmations, and the most detailed vision boards, but if your standards are low, your life will always collapse into that baseline. Standards are not loud or flashy. They don't need to be. They are quiet, consistent, and deeply rooted. They govern how you wake up, how you speak to yourself, how you allow others to treat you, and how you treat your time. Most people think it's their goals that determine their future. But that's a myth. Your goals show where you want to go, but your standards determine whether you'll actually make it there. It's like trying to sail across the ocean in a boat with holes in it. You might have a clear destination, but if the foundation isn't solid, if your standards allow for leaks, distractions, or disrespect, you'll never arrive. Or worse, you'll drift aimlessly, telling yourself stories to justify why you're stuck. Standards are not about being perfect. They're not about being better than others. They're about refusing to settle for less than you're capable of. They are the personal rules you enforce without needing validation. For example, if you have high standards for your physical health, you don't eat garbage food just because everyone else is doing it. If you have high standards for your relationships, you don't tolerate half-love, gory breadcrumbs, or toxic cycles. You walk away not because you're heartless, but because you're loyal to your peace. Every area of your life is a reflection of what you've been willing to tolerate. The job you hate but haven't left, that's a standard. The person who keeps disrespecting you but you keep forgiving without change, that's a standard. The way you procrastinate on your dreams, calling it waiting for the right time, that too is a standard. Most people don't raise their standards because doing so would force them to confront themselves. It would mean cutting ties with comfort, with excuses, and sometimes with people they love. It would require them to break out of identities that no longer fit. And growth, though beautiful, can be brutal. Raising your standards means saying, I love myself too much to keep repeating this pattern. And often, it's that decision that changes everything. Not the strategy, not the perfect plan, but the moment you say, no more. When your standards rise, your actions must follow. It's not enough to say, I deserve better. You must behave like someone who truly believes that. You must make decisions that reflect the worth you claim. If you say you value your peace, then stop answering chaos. If you say you want deep connections, stop entertaining shallow ones. If you say you're meant for greatness, then stop acting like you're average. This shift can be lonely because the world around you is calibrated to the old version of you. The one who settled, who said yes to things they didn't want, who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But something beautiful happens when you hold the line. Life begins to recalibrate. The wrong people fall away. The right ones come in. New opportunities show up. Not because the universe magically changes, but because you have. You teach the world how to treat you by what you accept. If you allow bare minimum, that's what you'll receive. But when you raise your standards, not just in words but in action, everything starts to shift. You become magnetic, not because you're louder or prettier or richer, but because you're aligned. You are no longer available for what drains you. You are no longer subscribing to stories that belittle your potential, and that's the beginning of real freedom. And that's the beginning of realize you were never waiting for life to change. Life was waiting for you to draw the line. Standards are not just conscious choices. They are subconscious boundaries quietly shaping the direction of your entire life. You don't always think about them, but they're there, built from years of beliefs, self-talk, past experiences and silent agreements you've made with the world. They influence what kind of relationships you allow, the way you speak to yourself, the jobs you take, the habits you maintain, and even the way you let people treat you. Most people don't even realize they have set these internal limits because they never actively decided them. They absorbed them from their environment, from their upbringing, from repeated disappointments and subtle conditioning. Imagine this. A person says they want to be respected, deeply loved and valued. But inside, their subconscious boundary, their standard, is set to tolerate neglect, inconsistency, or emotional immaturity. So what they say they want and what they're truly aligned with are miles apart. And what do they attract? Not what they desire, but what matches that internal standard. That's the quiet tragedy of life for so many. Not a lack of dreams, but a mismatch between desires and deeply programmed expectations. These subconscious standards are like invisible thermostats. No matter how high your motivation rises, if the internal setting is low, you'll unconsciously sabotage your success to return to your comfort zone. You'll push away good people because you don't feel worthy. You'll reject great opportunities because they feel too big. You'll delay your potential because some hidden part of you still believes you're not ready. And this happens not because you're lazy, but because your standards, your invisible script, haven't been rewritten. When you raise your standards, you're not just upgrading your goals, you're reprogramming your default setting. You're saying, this is what I now accept as normal. That shift is incredibly powerful, because once something becomes your new normal, you no longer have to force it. You embody it. You live it. It becomes your baseline. You no longer chase peace. You create it and protect it. You no longer plead for respect. You command it through how you show up. This is why transformation is less about willpower and more about identity. An identity is built on standards. You won't change your life until you change what you believe is acceptable for you. If you believe chaos is love, you'll keep finding it. If you believe struggle is noble, you'll reject ease. If you believe being needed equals being worthy, you'll attract situations that drain you. All of this lives in your subconscious standard. People often try to fix their external reality without ever addressing the internal foundation. They change jobs, partners, cities, but they take their low standards with them. and the same patterns repeat. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. You always align with what you think you deserve deep down. So, if you want to change your life, you must upgrade the level at which you say, "This is what I now choose for me." But let's be clear. Raising your standards is not an emotional high. It's a commitment. A decision made when no one is watching. It's not made in the comfort of inspiration, but often in the discomfort of realization. Realizing that you've been settling, realizing that you've been making excuses for others, realizing that you've betrayed your own needs to avoid confrontation. And in that moment you wake up, not with rage, but with clarity. This clarity gives you power. You begin to notice things you used to tolerate, and they suddenly feel unacceptable. You stop arguing for your limits. You stop explaining why you stayed. You stop romanticizing dysfunction. You stop calling your coping mechanisms personality traits. And instead, you start building a new framework, quietly, consistently, internally. You learn to say no, not to reject others, but to protect your peace. You learn to walk away, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You learn to raise the bar, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. This isn't about becoming rigid or unapproachable. It's about creating a space where only respect, truth, and depth are allowed. When your standards change, your relationships change, your habits change, your self-worth changes. You no longer live life from a place of fear, but from a place of power. And that is the true meaning of inner freedom. Not needing permission to want more, not waiting for life to get better, but deciding what you will no longer allow. Because the world doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you accept. Low standards don't announce themselves with loud chaos. They show up silently, subtly, slowly eroding the foundation of your life until one day you wake up in the middle of a storm you never intended to create. And yet you did. Not out of malice or weakness, but because you let too many things slide. You told yourself, it's not a big deal. Or maybe things will get better. Or this is just how life is. But every time you accepted something beneath your worth, you sent a message to the universe, to others, and most importantly to yourself, this is okay with me. And the universe listened, people listened, you listened. That's how chaos begins. Not as one big disaster, but as a series of quiet compromises. You stayed in a job that drained you because it paid the bills. You stayed in relationships that disrespected your soul because being alone felt scarier. You let your health decline because tomorrow was always a better day to start. And the longer you let your standards remain low, the more normal dysfunction starts to feel. Pain becomes routine. Disappointment becomes expected. Mediocrity becomes familiar. And slowly, you begin to forget what you were ever truly capable of. There is a danger in normalizing chaos. It tricks your mind into thinking that peace is unrealistic, that respect is too much to ask for, that joy must always come at a cost. You lower the bar until you no longer recognize your reflection. And then one day something breaks. A moment of clarity pierces through the noise. You realize that the suffering you're in is not just happening through you, it's happening through you. Because you didn't enforce a higher standard. Chaos thrives in spaces where there are no boundaries. When you don't say no, Life fills in the gaps with people, situations, and energy that serve no higher purpose. The problem isn't that people treat you poorly. The problem is that you keep letting them. The problem isn't that you're stuck. It's that you've built comfort around being stuck. The problem isn't that you lack potential. It's that you've allowed your standards to make excuses for not using it. Every area of your life where chaos exists is an invitation to raise the standard. If your relationships are full of drama, what have you been accepting in the name of love? If your time is constantly hijacked, what have you failed to protect in the name of being nice? If your mind is overwhelmed, what have you allowed to live rent-free in your thoughts? These aren't just circumstances, these are symptoms. The root, your standards. By raising your standards doesn't mean becoming harsh or cold. It means becoming clear, crystal clear. It means deciding what is no longer welcome in your life, not because you're better than others, but because you finally understand your worth. You stop explaining why you're walking away. You stop negotiating your value. You stop justifying why your needs matter. Chaos hates that because it feeds on confusion. When you decide that peace is more important than approval, things change. When you decide that growth is more valuable than comfort, doors open. When you decide that love must come with respect, not manipulation, your relationships begin to evolve or end. Either way, the chaos begins to dissolve, not because the world changed, but because you did. You raised the frequency of your existence, and everything that couldn't meet it naturally fell away. That's the power of standards. They are quiet, but they move mountains. They filter what gets access to you. And the higher they are, the more aligned your life becomes. You begin to attract clarity, strength, authenticity, and peace. You stop chasing things that aren't meant for you. You stop trying to fix broken people who never asked to be healed. You stop pouring into cups that never fill yours back. Those standards create chaos. High standards create order. And not just external order, but inner alignment. The kind that makes you walk lighter, think clearer, and breathe easier. You'll still face challenges, of course, but you'll face them with a stronger spine and a more peaceful mind. Because when you raise your standards, you don't just protect your life, you elevate it. And the difference is everything. There's a subtle lie that has been passed down through generations. One that disguises itself as wisdom, as maturity, even as virtue. It says, be humble. Don't expect too much. Be grateful for what you have, even if it hurts. Endure, tolerate, be nice. And in that message, many people unknowingly learn to shrink. They mistake self-sacrifice for love. They call suffering a spiritual badge of honor. They believe that to raise their standards would be selfish, prideful, or arrogant. But what they don't realize is that weakness often wears the mask of humility. And that mask has cost them years of their lives. True humility is powerful. It's not about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking of yourself rightly. It's knowing your worth without needing to boast. It's being grounded, not small. But what most people are taught is not humility. It's learned helplessness. It's the internalized belief that asking for more, expecting better, or walking away from dysfunction makes you ungrateful or difficult. And so, without realizing it, people stay where they are not respected. They accept what barely keeps them breathing. They celebrate crumbs and call it abundance. They confuse survival with grace. Raising your standards demands that you unlearn all of that. It asks you to look at where you've betrayed yourself in the name of being understanding. It forces you to recognize how many times you've stayed silent to avoid conflict, how often you've overextended to be liked, how frequently you've said it's okay when it absolutely wasn't. It shows you how often you've accepted less, not because that's all there was, but because somewhere along the way you believed that's all you deserved. Unlearning weakness, disguised as humility, is painful, because you have to look back at every time you allowed someone to treat you like an option while you made them a priority. You have to confront the moments when you held space for others while abandoning your own needs. You have to admit that some of the suffering you experienced wasn't just fate, it was permission. Silent permission you gave when you didn't speak up, when you didn't say no, when you didn't walk away. But here's the truth. Self-respect is not arrogance. Boundaries are not cruelty. Choosing yourself is not betrayal. You don't owe your silence to anyone who thrives in your submission. You don't owe your peace to people who only show up when it benefits them. Raising your standards is not about becoming hard. It's about becoming honest. Honest about what you need, what you believe in, what you will no longer entertain. It takes deep courage to say, I'm not available for this anymore. It takes strength to say, that may have been okay for me once, but it's not anymore. It takes boldness to stop playing small just to make others comfortable. And it takes immense self-awareness to see that sometimes the biggest obstacle to raising your standards is the false humility you were praised for. There is nothing noble about staying small to avoid making others feel insecure. There is nothing holy about enduring dysfunction just because you're afraid of being alone. There is nothing virtuous about staying silent when your soul is screaming. The real work is in reclaiming your voice, not to shout over others, but to stop whispering when you deserve to speak clearly. When you raise your standards, you might lose people. You might lose comfort. You might even lose the identity you built around being the good one, the one who never complains, the one who is always available, the one who always gives more than they get. Let it all go, because what you gain is far greater. You gain alignment. You gain integrity. You gain yourself. You'll begin to walk differently. People will feel your energy shift, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. You'll stop explaining your boundaries. You'll stop apologizing for your standards. And most of all, you'll stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself. So unlearn the weakness you've mistaken for humility. Let go of the narratives that say you must settle to be loved. There is nothing enlightened about playing small. There is nothing humble about staying broken. Real humility is walking in your truth without needing approval. Real strength is raising your standards and not looking back. Most people believe they need motivation to change their life. They wait for a spark, a breakthrough, a sign. But what truly changes your life isn't a burst of inspiration. It's a quiet, firm decision. A decision that whispers, I will not live like this anymore. That single moment of clarity holds more power than 1,000 pep talks. Because when you reach that threshold, when your soul becomes tired of repeating the same cycles, you no longer need to convince yourself. You just act. That's where true transformation begins. Not from force, but from fed-up honesty. There's something profoundly sacred about the moment you realize you're done. Not angry, not reactive, just done. You've cried the tears, you've repeated the patterns, you've tried to be patient, but now something shifts. You feel it in your bones. You can't tolerate the noise anymore. The noise of your own excuses, the noise of the people who drain you, the noise of a life that doesn't reflect who you truly are. That moment becomes the breaking point. But not in a destructive way. It's the breaking of illusion, the breaking of old contracts you made with fear. The moment you finally see that the door has always been unlocked, you just had to stop pretending you were trapped. It's easy to think that major change requires a perfect plan, that you need a 5-year goal, a vision board, or someone to guide you step by step. But the truth is, the most powerful changes begin in silence. No one sees it. No one hears it. It's just you, alone with your truth, alone with your boundaries, alone with your choice to raise the bar. And while the world may not notice right away, everything inside you begins to rewire. Raising your standards is an act of self-respect. It's not about being better than anyone else. It's about finally acting in alignment with the version of you that you keep dreaming about. It's about saying, if I really loved myself, what would I stop tolerating? And once you answer that, you can no longer pretend you don't know. You can't unknow what you've realized. That knowledge demands change. It demands action. And it's in that action, however uncomfortable, that your life begins to transform. You stop reaching for people who never reach back. You stop settling for routines that slowly drain your spirit. You stop begging the world to treat you better and start treating yourself better. You eat differently. You speak differently. You walk away from conversations that don't align with your peace. And without shouting about it, you become a mirror reflecting what you now accept and what you absolutely will not. The decision to raise your standards also means grieving the old you, the version of you who tolerated too much, who explained too often, who stayed too long, who tried to be loved by shrinking, pleasing, or sacrificing. That version was doing the best they could with what they knew. But they can't come with you anymore. You have to leave them behind with love. Because where you're going, there's no room for that version. There's only room for truth, peace, strength, and clarity. Sometimes people will misunderstand your new standards. They'll call you distant, selfish, or arrogant. Let them. It is not your job to stay small so others feel big. It is not your duty to continue old patterns just because they're familiar to others. Your responsibility is to your truth, and raising your standards is how you honor that truth. This is not about being perfect. It's about no longer choosing pain when peace is possible. No longer choosing confusion when clarity is available. No longer choosing fear when courage is calling. All of that begins with a decision, not a dramatic, impulsive one, but a sacred, quiet one that comes from deep within. You decide, I'm done living at war with myself. I'm done chasing what doesn't serve me. I'm done lowering my standards just to be accepted. And from that decision you build. Slowly, quietly, powerfully. You change not to impress anyone, but because you finally remember who you are, the standards you set, are the silent architects of your life. They're not loud, not flashy, not always visible from the outside, but they shape everything. Your relationships, your career, your self-worth, your energy, your peace, all of it bends to the level you decide is acceptable. And the truth most people avoid is this: the world doesn't give you what you hope for, it gives you what you're willing to tolerate. That's why raising your standards isn't just a personal decision. It's a message, it's a broadcast to the universe, to people, to circumstances, saying, this is what I allow now. This is the level I live by. But here's the catch. Change doesn't begin with others. It begins with you. People won't start respecting you more because you ask them to. Life won't suddenly offer you better outcomes just because you're tired of suffering. The shift only happens when you change how you show up. When you decide that you're no longer available for anything less than what aligns with your peace, your truth, your growth, that's when everything else begins to adjust. It's not about controlling the outside. It's about mastering your inside. And that mastery begins in small decisions. It's in the way you talk to yourself when no one's listening. It's in the way you respond to situations that once triggered you. It's in choosing not to engage with drama that you used to tolerate. It's in walking away from half-hearted connections, even if it means walking alone for a while. These aren't grand gestures. They're quiet refusals, quiet boundaries, quiet confirmations that the old version of you is no longer running the show. You begin to notice how certain conversations feel like poison. You begin to realize that saying yes out of guilt is a form of self-betrayal. You understand that being available to everyone is actually being unavailable to yourself. You stop explaining so much, you stop negotiating your worth, you stop bending backwards to prove you're good enough, and slowly your energy becomes more focused, more grounded, more untouchable. This internal shift is what actually upgrades your external reality. When you raise your standards, you filter out the noise. People who thrived on your compliance begin to fall away. Patterns that depended on your silence begin to break. And opportunities that match your new frequency begin to appear, not because they weren't there before, but because you finally created space for them. When you operate from higher standards, everything becomes more intentional. You don't date to fill a void. You connect from fullness. You don't work to prove your value. You build from passion and clarity. You don't surround yourself with people just to avoid loneliness. You choose who reflects your truth. This kind of living is powerful because it's rooted. It's not chasing, it's not hoping, it's knowing. And yet, this shift often feels lonely at first, because not everyone will understand the new you. Some will say, "You've changed," and they'll be right. You have changed. You've stopped settling. You've stopped performing. You've stopped allowing energy into your life that drains rather than fuels. And while that may threaten those who benefited from your lower standards, it will liberate those who align with your higher ones. Raising your standards is not about arrogance. It's not about thinking you're better than others. It's about finally treating yourself the way you always deserve to be treated. It's about remembering that your time, your peace, and your energy are sacred, and that anyone who can't respect them simply doesn't get access to them. no bitterness, no anger, just clarity. That clarity becomes your compass. It guides your choices. It protects your growth. It keeps you aligned. So when old temptations return, when you're tempted to lower your standards just to feel accepted or safe, you pause. You remember the chaos you left behind. You remember the peace you fought to create. And you say no, not because you're hard, but because you're healed. So yes, when you raise your standards, everything else eventually rises to meet you, or it falls away. Either outcome is a blessing, because your job is not to convince the world of your value. Your job is to embody it fully, quietly, relentlessly, and let the rest fall into place. The fear of being alone is one of the most deceptive traps that keeps people stuck in cycles beneath their worth. It whispers that being in a relationship, any relationship, is better than facing your own reflection. It convinces you that staying in a familiar job, no matter how unfulfilling, is safer than exploring the unknown. It tells you that silence is dangerous, that solitude is punishment. And so you cling, you settle, you tolerate things that slowly eat away at your soul, not because you're weak, but because no one ever taught you the beauty of solitude. But the truth is, learning to be alone is the foundation of raising your standards. If you cannot sit in your own company and feel at peace, you will always chase people and situations that distract you from yourself. You'll confuse attention with affection. You'll interpret presence as value. You'll mistake comfort for compatibility. And in doing so, you'll hand over your power just to avoid the emptiness you fear. Raising your standards often requires you to walk alone, not because you're unworthy of love, but because you're finally worthy of real love. Not because you want to isolate, but because you need to detox from everything that taught you to settle. Solitude becomes sacred. It's in the quiet that you hear your real voice again, the one you silence for years to fit in, to please, to survive. It's in the stillness that you start to recognize what you actually want, not just what you were taught to want. People often say they fear loneliness, but what they're really afraid of is the discomfort that comes when all the noise stops, when you're no longer distracted by constant texts, likes, validation, or social expectations. That silence feels foreign at first, because you've built an identity around being needed, wanted, included. But once you surrender to it, once you lean into the aloneness instead of resisting it, you realize something profound. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. In fact, most people feel they're loneliest while surrounded by others who don't understand them. Aloneness is where clarity is born. It's where you begin to distinguish between what you actually value and what society said you should value. It's where you uncover your non-negotiables. And here's the truth. You cannot raise your standards if you're terrified of being alone, because fear will always make you settle. It will convince you that a little mistreatment is normal, that a little chaos is manageable, that a little disrespect is the price you pay for not being left behind. But once you realize that solitude is strength, not lack, you stop trading your dignity for companionship. You stop twisting yourself into someone you're not just to be chosen. You stop overgiving in hopes of being loved. You understand that your peace is more important than being liked. Your wholeness is more sacred than being needed. And if someone cannot meet you at the level of your growth, they are not your loss, they are your lesson. This shift is not easy. It will challenge every belief you had about love, worth, and belonging. You'll question your past choices. You'll grieve the version of you who clung to people just to avoid the silence. But you'll also meet a version of yourself you never knew existed. One who doesn't settle, doesn't shrink. One who trusts that being alone with integrity is better than being surrounded with compromise. When you finally embrace solitude, your standards begin to rise, naturally. You no longer tolerate emotional crumbs. You stop explaining why your boundaries matter. You become the person who is whole before anyone else arrives. And because of that, you stop attracting relationships based on need and start welcoming those built on alignment, mutual respect, and shared growth. So yes, learning to be alone is a necessary step. It is the space in which you reclaim your power, your clarity, and your identity. It is where you learn that you are not hard to love. You are just loving from a place of fear. And now, with stillness as your companion, you can begin to love from a place of strength. Never fear the silence. It is not your enemy, it is your mirror. And when you finally look into it with courage, you'll see the truth. You are never truly alone. You are just finally with yourself. And that, above all else, is the standard that changes everything. There is a moment in every journey where you must stop asking for permission. Permission to grow, permission to say no, permission to walk away from things that no longer serve your peace. For most of your life, you've been trained to seek approval, sometimes quietly through your behavior, and other times openly through your words. You've been conditioned to look outward before acting inward. But raising your standards is the point where that pattern must end, because no one else is coming to hand you your worth on a silver platter. You have to claim it, decide it, embody it. This isn't about being defiant or rebellious. It's about waking up to your own authority. The authority to decide what you allow, what you reject, and what you invite. When you raise your standards, you stop outsourcing your value. You stop needing validation to make decisions. You stop giving people the power to define what is enough for you. And for the first time, you sit in your own certainty. This kind of self-leadership doesn't start with grand gestures. It begins in the quiet refusal to shrink, in the soft daily choices to act from alignment instead of fear. It happens when you stop over-explaining your no and let it stand, when you stop tolerating emotional crumbs in the hope someone will eventually offer a full meal. It's in the moment you stop asking, am I allowed to want more? And instead declare, I do. And when you do, something remarkable happens. The people and experiences that relied on your uncertainty begin to fall away. Not because you've become cruel, but because you've become clear. You realize that many of the things you once called loyalty were actually fear in disguise. Fear of being alone. Fear of being judged. Fear of breaking the script others wrote for you. But now, the only script that matters is your own. That script might look like declining invitations that drain you. It might sound like walking away from love that comes with conditions. It might feel like standing alone while others talk, but standing taller than ever because you're rooted in truth. And while it might seem uncomfortable at first, there's a deep peace that replaces the old anxiety. Because when you stop begging for permission, you start reclaiming your freedom. This transformation often creates distance. People may accuse you of changing. They'll say you've become distant, cold, arrogant. But what they're really witnessing is the absence of your former compliance, the absence of your former need to be approved. And while that may unsettle them, it will liberate you. Because when your standards rise, you stop being available for dysfunction, for chaos, for shallow praise. You become available only for what nourishes your soul, not just your image. And yes, this path requires courage. Because the moment you decide to stop asking for permission, you also take full responsibility for your life. There's no one left to blame. You can't point the finger and say, they made me stay, or they never supported me. From this place, you begin to trust your inner voice above the noise. You no longer need 10 opinions before you act. You no longer feel guilt for outgrowing environments that once felt safe. And most importantly, you stop apologizing for wanting more. More peace, more love, more alignment, more purpose. Not in excess, but in depth. You realize it's not selfish to expect quality. It's self-respect. This is what it means to raise your standards, to make peace with disappointing others so you can stop disappointing yourself, to walk away from anything that costs you your clarity, to stop dancing for approval and start walking in purpose. And once you do, life will respond. Maybe not instantly, but inevitably. Because when you become the kind of person who honors their own standards, the universe begins to honor them too. So let this be the moment where you stop waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to want better. Stop looking for permission in the eyes of others. You are not here to live by someone else's expectations. You are here to rise, to live deeply, to choose consciously, and to demand without apology a life that reflects your truth. No one can give you that kind of life. You have to build it. And it starts the moment you stop asking and start claiming. When you raise your standards, you raise your life, not through noise, not through force, but through clarity. You begin to see the difference between what you've been conditioned to accept and what you truly deserve. You stop shrinking to fit into places you've outgrown. You stop begging to be seen and start choosing to see yourself. The path may feel lonely at first, but it's not emptiness. It's spaciousness. Space for peace. Space for truth. Space for what aligns. You no longer chase love. You attract it by becoming whole. You no longer fear silence. You embrace it as your greatest teacher. And you no longer ask for permission. You move in certainty, knowing that your standards are not walls to keep others out, but boundaries to protect your becoming. This is the quiet power of transformation. Not the loud kind that seeks attention, but the still, unwavering kind that builds a life worth living, the life you were always meant for.